I was born in the Soviet Union, and when I was young, I was quite interested in math and physics. I was one of those nerds that reads math and physics journals. And when we came to America, I was 14, and we took with us quite a number of those journals, and we were later getting some of them by mail. And just a few days ago, I happened to open one of these quantum magazines, what they call a journal of math and physics, mostly for students of school, of high school maybe level. Generally, I read these things in the bathroom, by the way. Something to read on Shabbat or on Yom Tov when you cannot, of course, look at your phone and meanwhile check the news or something in Israel, which is something I would do on a weekday. But on Shabbat or on Yom Tov, sometimes I take an old quantum magazine, and I was reading something here, an article that was estimating the travel to planet Mars. And by the way, these people are quite knowledgeable. I mean, the Soviet Union was the first country to send the first person in space, and altogether the first spaceship was built in the Soviet Union. So generally, these people are quite qualified. A lot of their predictions could have come true. So they made a number of predictions, how long it will take to get to Mars, and how many people would be reasonable to take on this kind of mission, and how long they should stay on Mars for the first mission. And among other predictions was the minimal and maximal estimation of when people will get on Mars. And the minimal estimation was year 2005, and the maximum was year 2020. Now, today somebody might laugh at this, but the truth of the matter is I think it would have been quite possible, except they couldn't have that a few months later, this particular magazine, this quantum magazine, happens to be from year 1990, from October. And just a few months later, of course, the Soviet Union fell apart, and they already had no time or money for any kind of serious expedition to Mars. And then American taxpayers didn't really want to put in too much money into this kind of competition anymore, since there was nobody to compete against. It's known that a lot of money went into the expedition to the moon, primarily in order to show that Americans aren't any worse, just because Russians were the first ones to get to outer space. So here in America, we'll be the first ones to get on the moon. But now that there is no competition, since the Soviets couldn't get into the Mars, and there was no Soviet Union, and by the way, no quantum magazine either for years. So why in the world would America put in hundreds of billions of dollars in order to get to Mars? Today, maybe the possibility again exists, but already by a private company, of course. Elon Musk wants to try this. But whatever the case may be, this just shows how little we know when we're predicting things. Somebody thought it was quite reasonable that we would get that the first people on Mars would be somewhere between year 2005 and year 2020, but history went a very different way, and nobody could have known. The reason I'm saying all this is because now, of course, the world in general, and in particular America and Israel, are standing in front of very great choices. Who knows how things will be? Nobody can predict, nobody can expect. A lot of the predictions that people make turn out to be true, and a lot of them turn out to be false. Nobody can really know how to predict the future because we don't have prophets. Just a few months ago, when the war of Israel and Hezbollah was discussed, the consensus was that if Israel will actually enter Lebanon and Hezbollah will use its full power, there will be many thousands of Israelis dead. That was a consensus among many of the leftist Israeli figures as well, including some generals. There are quite a number of leftist generals in Israel, and that's the kind of position they held. And of course, America is always worried about escalation. That's the worst. They see the worst nightmare for America is always to to escalate. So for them, it's always better to give in to the worst terrorists just so that it doesn't escalate, which is of course a terrible politics in the long run, because this just makes the enemy stronger and stronger and stronger. If, for instance, something like the October 7th massacre would have happened 10 years later, it would have been tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands people dead, not 1,000 people dead. Anytime you give in to the terrorists, they just become stronger. But Hezbollah was in fact very strong. There's no question that Hezbollah was incredibly strong. And it's one of the strongest armies in the world. It's the strongest non-governmental army in the world. And it's given almost unlimited weapons from Iran. Israelis are now discovering what kinds of weapons they had, what kinds of tunnels they had. If they would join in at that moment when Hamas took leadership and did the October 7th massacre, if Hezbollah would have joined that same day, they would have probably killed at least tens of thousands of Jews, maybe hundreds of thousands of Jews. And the rest of Israelis too, of course. Hamas and Hezbollah, they generally don't distinguish between different Israelis, Jews or Arabs or Druze or whatever they are. Fortunately, it took them a day to figure out what Hamas is doing. They didn't rush in. Hamas was hoping that Hezbollah, once they see the success of Hamas, they'll join in. But thankfully, it took them like a day to figure it out. And by that time, the Israeli army was already stationed in huge numbers of soldiers, and everybody was prepared for the invasion in the north. There were, in fact, more people immediately sent, more soldiers sent by Israel to the north and actually to Gaza itself, because that was the greater danger. So thankfully, Israel avoided a greater catastrophe at that time. And then, of course, as we know, for almost a year, Hezbollah was bombarding everybody and killing people, and nothing was done, and the world did nothing. And then at last, when Israel entered in, and now, of course, the world sees that Hezbollah wasn't able to kill thousands of Jews or to inflict the enormous damage that people thought about. Now, of course, everybody's screaming that Israel should stop. This, again, is the politics of most European countries. I'm not even talking about places of true evil. I'm talking about countries that, in general, you'd think would be supportive of Israel when it's destroying Hezbollah and other similar terrorists and saving their civilization. But unfortunately, the best thing that they think of, whether it's in France or in England or in most other countries, and to some extent it's true in America too. Certainly by the left, this has been the case, and that is that always just try to push the problem further. Not my term, not my election. This is one of the problems with, of course, democracy. Democracy has a lot of advantages, but one of the disadvantages is that every person elected needs, just for the term for which they serve, they need to avoid any major escalations, any major problems, and let the next one decide. So even though the next one will have to face a much greater problem, they still would rather avoid problems as long as they can. So this is the unfortunate situation today. Maybe if then the next government of America will be Republican, then it's possible that the policy will change. Republicans are much more understanding of the long-time side effect of this type of appeasement policies. But we don't know. Nobody really knows. I believe it's very likely that Trump will win the next election and that the Republicans will take the Senate and the Congress, but nobody can know. Just like the great experts couldn't have known that nobody will fly into Mars neither in year 2005 nor in year 2020, so too the great experts today, and I'm not a great expert at any rate, cannot know what will happen. What we can know is that we'll pray and hope that Hashem will have the world survive one of the greatest crises that it's entering. Maybe this year we will see the better world, a world where the evil Iranian government that took over the Iranian people will be thrown out, just like the Soviet government was by the Russian people, and Iran will finally breathe free. Maybe the Lebanese will be able to throw out Hezbollah once it's so severely damaged and weakened by Israel. Maybe Lebanese will be able to breathe free, and Lebanon will become again the Singapore of the Middle East. It's not like I only want Israel to succeed. I want everybody to succeed. I think it would be great if Lebanon would be a free, democratic country with true peace and with peace treaties with its neighbors. I think it would be just great if Syria would become a democratic country and would be controlled by good people who live and let live. And I think it would be just fantastic if Iran, which the vast majority of the population of Iran are fantastic people who just cannot throw their wicked government away. Now, any kind of war, of course, involves civilian casualties. This is the unfortunate result, but we have to remember that if there are some civilian casualties today, there will be much more civilian casualties if we wait. If we wait till the terrorists are even more powerful, especially if we send them a signal of weakness, that for us the most important thing is to avoid the war. This is how Hitler started World War II. Once he saw how weak the British government is, what he perceived as tremendous weakness, that they gave him basically part of Czechia, part of Czechoslovakia, and that they want peace at any cost, they would never be able to fight, they would never be willing to fight. And to some extent he was right. It was true about France, for instance. Right? France basically did not continue to fight until the end. On the contrary, they once they saw they're losing, they just made a peace treaty with Hitler, and later on they fought in various countries like North Africa and Asian, Middle East. They would fight on the side of Hitler. People don't realize, but France, to a large extent, was actually an ally of Hitler for the rest of World War II. In the beginning of World War II, it was the opposite. The Soviet Union was the ally of Hitler. There's a lot of countries that were allies of Hitler. But at any rate, in the end, when British elected a different government and Churchill came to power, who put his foot down and said, if Hitler invades Poland, we're going to fight, then even though the World War II started and so many people died, but at least Nazi regime was destroyed. But if you could imagine, they would still have a weak government, so they would say, what do we need this? Who cares about Poland? And Poland would fall to Hitler, and then more countries would fall, and then they would get to Britain as well. He'd have the entire Europe. He had in the end most of Europe, but England stayed and fought until the very end. And that's why it's so important to stop the aggressors, to stop the terrorists before they become too powerful. And I'm really hoping that America will have the wisdom to do that, because of course American help is very important. Israel alone, and especially when America is doing the opposite and trying to stop the escalation and always trying to push Israel not to be too strong, then chances are in the future, in the long run, there will be even more punishments. But whatever the case may be, we have to do our part, and we'll hope that Hashem has for this year, maybe Hashem has a time for recovery rather than the terrible punishments that came last year. Rabot machshavot belevish v'yatzat Hashem itakum. Many other thoughts in a man's heart, but it's Hashem's advice that will come true.